Today, like never before, the chance for achieving progress in preventing global threats in our complex world depends on the effective and urgent solutions to the problems that cannot begin without recognition of the past mistakes that often involves emotional challenges. And to the likely surprise of many fans of Johann Sebastian Bach, this master music educator with neuroscientist's mindset found unique, unconventional, and effective hands-on solution for this obstacle to progress that manifests into resentment and retaliation to change. And his use of transformative power of music brought to reality Bach's joy-based teaching tool, masterfully crafted as the container for using self-deprecating humor and for the embodiment of self-reflection, for overcoming of self-defeating cognitive dissonance. And it can guide students of Bach's scores to breaking through their inner barriers to greatness through unconventional and truly superb solution, by achieving clarity and self-mastery over the maladaptive impacts from evolutionary relics of evolutionary young and still imperfect human brain. This tool for self-propelled evolution is no less but the precious gift from the advocate for humanity Bach, and it is one of invaluable didactic assets for music instructors and students of his scores that are featured in the new ebook titled Paradox of Invisible Dissonance in Fugue-Parody by J.S. Bach. This unique publication provided invaluable perspective of piano instructor Rosalina Gutmann, resonant to Bach's own teaching duties that impacted his compositional concepts that had been missing in Bach scholarship. This condensed to the basics publication is focused on the issues of didactic update on the major discrepancies in the didactic aids with the score facts related to dissonant sonorities, such as impossible-to-miss cluster chords, that has been commonly left undetected in considered to be the exemplary to follow for students' recordings and publications on interpretation of music of Bach. That is why the spreading worldwide college discourse on these subjects that call for the related urgent didactic update for the teaching approaches to Bach's legacy demands for demonstration of the grasp and working knowledge of the related observations of rather sensational phenomenon of this collective perceptual paradox in order to prove intellectual leadership that had been put to the test by Bach. More and more students and members of academia are becoming involved into discussions of the illuminated by Bach, fascinating subjects of the achieved deeper understanding of the psychological drivers of conformity-driven self-defeat mechanisms and related opportunities for music-based curriculum for building the skills of the self-mastery, propelled through readers' observations of the evident facts of this collective blind spot. It made clear the staggering power of conformity to afflict many musicians, whose academic titles, honors of distinction, acclaim, and fame failed to protect them from serious cognitive failure, caused by the invisible slave master of the human brain called conformity to social influences, that remains unknown at this time to the majority of people who need to gain awareness of this case in order to practice healthy vigilance against skillful manipulations of public opinion. The capacity for the attainment of the perceptual sobriety, for the factual score content, from the staggering influence of the false stereotypes, has become the critical marker for all students of Bach's scores for proving their merits. That is why this insightful guide on the subject is indispensable for all musicians. The readers are guided through the inner workings of Bach's craft, of using notation of polyphonic texture for spelling out the sense of musical humor that had to be unearthed from the oblivion. And now everyone deserves to savor this intellectual delight that can be used as the applied music tool with great benefits of the self-reflection, self-assessment, and self-mastery. These insights on the paradox of invisible factual score content led the author Rosalina Gutmann to the cascade of her other discoveries on the legacy of her colleague extraordinaire Bach, and it included the grasp of the tradition of politically correct omissions of the significant facts of his biography, related to the subject of musical innovations of Bach likely surprising to the readers. For example, this fugue in the style of parody on dogma has direct link to Bach's false retaliatory month-long imprisonment. However, majority of musicians and their fans have never heard of such dramatic events in his biography, or at best, have very limited and often distorted grasp about his lifelong struggles with imposed upon him limitations of prisoner of conscience, due to his open expression of moral indignation regarding the injustice towards him personally and towards professional guild of musicians in general. But the court records, kept by the cronies of Bach's harassers instead, are evident of false accusations against him, revealing criminalization of his notice of leave to his employer due to severe underpayment for his work and intolerable atmosphere of senseless censorship by mediocrity. Instead of anticipated promotion to the position of his supervisor after his death, Bach suddenly learned that even more mediocre relative of his late boss was appointed by his employer to supervise and censor his music. Such odd way to show gratitude to the genius, instead of giving Bach overdue wages raise, destroyed his hopes for ever earning respect and fairness for his sincere efforts. And the power abuses went on, as Bach became the victim of notorious scam of the false retaliatory imprisonment, in dire violation of human rights, due to his vulnerability of being too poor to hire effective legal defense from false accusations by predatory minds, who falsely framed him as some criminal. No! Of course, Bach did not commit any crime. Instead, Bach became the victim of crime of character assassination. The notorious intrigue by vicious power abusers aimed to create prejudice against him by launching the lifelong witch hunt upon the genius by deliberately inciting false stigma of convict. These criminal minds used stereotypical assumption that the false imprisonment must have been deserved, allowing for easy manipulation of public opinion against the prisoner of conscience Bach. This barbaric incivility of retaliation to the innocent catalyst of change hurt more already underprivileged, overwhelmed by poverty musician, and his unapologetic harassers were certain that they will never be held responsible for their crime of false incrimination of genius by the skillfully calculated manipulation of the public opinion. Their effort to hide their ethical impoverishment and moral atrocity succeeded. False retaliatory incrimination of their critic was the tool for hiding their lack of fitness to the leadership, pulled off by taking advantage of public trust. Even upon release from the false month-long confinement, genius Bach received no mere apology for the lifetime of suffering from left unpunished crime, while sharing the plight of unspeakable injustice with millions of other musicians of all generations who suffered from the similar, normalized, centuries-long persecution by undervaluation and poverty. But instead of spotlighting this unstoppable for all musicians plight, Bach's biographies, paradoxical, skip subjects of his suffering from the impacts of living as the easy target for criminal acts against them, routinely left with no prosecution, along with normalized response of the blind eye of indifference by the rest of the society to such unfair mistreatment. That is why the author's vows to bring to light own similar, blood-chilling experience, while in the position of the advocate for Bach's cause, makes her upcoming biographicals, with parallels to Bach's life to be highly anticipated extension of this insightful publication, on her sensational unearthing of the evidence for the need for all musicians to learn sobering and invaluable, yet obscured lessons from Bach on developing higher level of emotional resonance, essential for insisting on building more compassionate world. Along with the shocking symbolism of her testimony, her lifelong work of raising awareness for the urgent priority to overcome centuries-long tradition of normalized cruelty towards musicians point to most unaffordable for humanity, blind spot of self-defeating underdevelopment of consciousness in the face of global threats to the humankind. Bach's intellectual leadership in using his music to awaken the dormant feelings have the power to counterpoint zombification, along with normalization of cognitive dissonance, the precursor of injustice among the society at the root psychological driver's level. Today, These mental obstacles interfere with new approaches to decision-making and are the key to fast-approaching societal collapse. The lack of attitude for no business as usual in shifting from dictated by wealth decision-making power comes at the cost of vast and rapidly increasing human suffering. Today, like never before, Bach's musical rebellion remains critical. Today's musicians need to learn from him how he subverted the culture of monarchy and its enforcement through sophisticated culture to manipulate public opinion, by promoting emotional detachment from reality, in order to normalize the suffering from pathological system. Dogma for music turned it into the integral part of this mechanism for subduing moral indignation of its cruelly usurped victims on the unconscious level. Thus, the vicious character assassination attack on Bach by distorting his core aims and restraining his music by emotional confinement, left with no clarity in politically correct musicological literature, disallowed for Bach's lessons to be learned by music students and by the humanity, impacting collective consciousness of humankind. And the vastness of the resulting from such distortion multi-generational developmental damage is hardly possible to enumerate with accurate numbers. Beethoven compared him to the ocean, warning against mistaking him with a mere creek, since Bach defied the demand for the culture that supported emotional detachment and zombification, necessary to maintain status quo of monarchy regime. Readers will examine Unearthed from Stereotypical Distortion Fugue, serving as the evident proof for Bach's use of emerging innovations of Silbermann's version of fortepiano to expand dynamics diversity in his keyboard music, as a part of his vocal musical rebellion against diminishing music's emotional resonance, contrary to the common for his historical period conventions. And such contribution of Bach to the pivotal shift in the development of music history and for using music for elevating consciousness, being evident of his mindset of neuroscientist, deserves for special honor and spotlight due to current symbolism. The ebook helps raise awareness among many Bach's diehard fans about another important yet underpublicized fact, related to his invaluable pedagogical accomplishments. As the result of unfair persecution, Bach was forced into the least paid and declined by several other musicians' job of the music teacher at the St. Thomas Church School for At-Risk Youth. But fortunately for humanity, since genius had to master effective teaching methods to meet emotional challenges of his students through music education, combining it with the role of music therapy counselor, all music instructors and music therapy providers can and deserve to have the access to developing practical applications, based on graciously ahard by the author Rosalina Gutmann, achievements of Bach in this realm. That is why every musician deserves to become familiar with the contents of this ebook that guides examination of the striking outcomes of such impacts and provides the evidence for the consequent disability of musicians to see and to hear score facts of the great meaning. Indeed, this lesson from Bach allowed for facing bitter, and yet the essential truth about vulnerability of the human mind to indoctrination into false perception of harmful concepts during childhood that tends to sustain throughout lifetime due to the stubborn inertia. Fortunately, it came along with Bach's effective toolset for the reflection of such cognitive paralysis inflicted by double standard and the means for overcoming it. Readers of ebook will gain the grasp of the unique design of the piece that intuitively employed dopaminergic effects of musical humor, allowing for the easy relief from the moral dilemmas over the pursuits of truth in educational methods. For example, this Bach's Laughter Manifesto makes easy to choose between the ethical and unethical options, such as A. Should this fugue be performed with nuanced dynamics to manifest humor of Bach's spelled out in notation intentions of emboldened parody on dogma, while enjoying laughter in his company, based on rediscovery of the obscured truth? Or B. Should musicians continue to stick to the conventional typewriter sound that leads to flawed, boring, illogical oversimplification of humorous content of this tiny maverick? And, consequently, Fugue-Parody helps in making the similar moral choices simple in the context of the entire legacy of Bach. Bach's unearthed tiny humorous maverick promotes self-reflection on such essential questions as, should interpreters of Bach's music be required to continue to give up nuanced dynamics that allow for the clarity of voicing and the depth of complex polyphonic texture of many other Bach's compositions, according to the primitive yet widespread dogma of forcing senseless typewriter replication on the piano that strips his profoundly moving compositions off their emotional resonance and oversimplifies their complex beauty? The ebook provides citations of the studies that prove the hazardous nature of emotional repression. It helps members of academia to be prepared to handle with appropriate professional ethics such questions, as does the community of musicians deserve to continue to tolerate paradoxical enforcement of the false educational standard for hazardous, for health of musicians, emotional repression, that is impermissible, emotionally harmful method of teaching? Readers will examine Bach's own tool for training his students to overcome typical, for his historical period, lack of nuanced dynamics. Liberated from distortion, Fugue made evident that limits for dynamics' variety on hammer action, piano, fortepiano, and related emotional repression, under irrelevant to Bach excusiology for historically informed performance, can be compared to senseless efforts to force this giant of musical intellect into Lilliputian standards. Indeed, nothing can be more absurd and cruel than limiting the capacity of millions of musicians to experience joy, spelled out by Bach in Fugue-Parody. Manifested through masterful notation, Bach's laughter at the illusionary nature of the above ethical dilemmas refutes their nonsensical bluff. Liberated from stereotypical distortions, Fugue-Parody delivered self-evident proof of Bach's intentional subversion and open defiance of the common for his historical period, rules for zombification of music, with counterpoint of spelled with notation humor, joy, and fun, making polyphony studies addictive. Rosalina Gutmann's user manual will enable readers' enjoyment of this intellectual delight of laughter test, created by Bach for training his own students to achieve dynamically engaging and emotionally resonant to his humor performance. She offered the technical secret of the trade that enables the use of this fugue as the container to help deflate and overcome ill pride and paralysis of self-defeat triggers, thanks of instant, fun-based and satisfying with joy, authentic engagement with humor metaphors for role-playing in self-deprecating comedy of absurd, to restore lost clarity. And this achieved by Bach's capacity of music to ease and to optimize the learning process is truly incomparable. Bach's challenge for today's music instructors to demonstrate professional duty for taking the lead and to use college discourse to declare their proficiency and working knowledge of this Bach's tool verifies their passing of his test for the resilience to the moral atrocity culture. Their working knowledge of the use of this fugue for sharing laughter with students and colleagues serves as the evident proof of their intellectual leadership. Since his music plays the role of the cornerstone in music education, in the face of the observed evidence of the crisis of professional ethics, re-establishing coherence of teaching methods with the true concepts of Bach's counterpoint to zombification in music and beyond, has pivotal for music history impact, and thus, it had become essential for every member of academia. Bach's lessons on creating effective tools of music-led cognitive technology help to fulfill universal yearning of every user of still evolving human brain for overcoming glitches, confusion, and blind spots of the human mind, and achieving more clarity for the human perception of the polyphony of inner and outer universe. For most of today's instructors who use Bach's didactic materials, it may appear as the shocking surprise that timeless genius Bach was not appreciated for his outstanding and unique music gift by representatives of the archaic educational system, but instead, he was subjected to constant hostility of microaggressions, while also suffering from the initial manipulation into the contract with intolerable underpayment. And yet, he was unable to find alternative, more valued job with deserved for his talent pay, title, and respect. But instead, he was forced by the unfair convict stigma into the lifelong lifestyle of struggling musician, common among millions of his fellow colleagues of the past and present. These circumstances, along with the implications of the underdeveloped collective consciousness, resulting from the unending tradition of systematic and institutionalized persecution of the musician's profession by normalized impoverishment, marginalization, devaluation by the dysfunctional power institutions, should have been the subject of centuries-long society-wide discourse. But the subject of Bach's leadership had been paradoxically left with no attention even among Bach scholars, who failed to walk in his shoes of impoverished musician with compassion to his constant suffering from the unmet, desperate, and basic needs. That is why, in the addendum, the author calls for camaraderie of all progressive forces to demand for the official apology to Bach and to come to the rescue of musicians and humanity during pivotal for humanity point, in order to join Bach in his unfinished battle with the hazardous for all power abuse against vulnerable musicians, often driven by the fear of the unique and superior intellectual leadership and their above-average capacity to act, instead of helping to facilitate the best ways for consciousness transformers to quench humanity's millennia-long yearning for learning the skills for optimizing brain function through music-led self-reflection and self-mastery. After liberation from the distortion, this stellar example of Bach's lifelong commitment of advocate for humanity deserves to be honored and elevated to the attention of all forces of progress. This call upon all musicians to contribute to engaging their audiences into the society-wide discourse is of great urgency now, in the face of the need for creation of the global shift of consciousness, with the top priority for prevention of the fast-approaching global threats and the humanity's relevant dire need for beneficial for all development of the skills to harness the ancestral gift of music instinct, driven by the joy neurotransmitters. Population deserves to know of the innate capacity to reshape and recalibrate the brain and elevate the consciousness beyond currently dominant self-defeat through development of the skills of self-assessment and self-propelled evolution assisted through music embodiment. Today, 3 centuries later, the narrative about Bach's vocal protest against the system, based on the power abuse against the most vulnerable populations, still demands courage to partner with Bach's vocal opposition against current unconstitutional, yet allowed to govern impunity for the crimes by the public servants, encouraging them to abuse their power. However, contrary to the isolation constraints for Bach's fight with the Goliath of the stubbornness of evolutionary relics, today catalysts of change don't have to fight their battle with incivility alone. Today, the students of his scores have the ability to use the power of the global camaraderie to bring forward Bach's example of genius suffering from vicious retaliation to change, in order to be effective in the face of unconstitutional and yet prominent impunity for misconduct and crimes for the army of public servants. Impunity had become an existential public health threat that allows for primitive minds to use senseless, illogical privileges to stifle positive changes in all parts of society. But instead, the contrary enforcement of the higher standards for prevention of power abuse should be enforced in compliance with the studies on observed Lucifer effect, known as Stanford Prison Experiment, evident of seemingly nice people turning evil under the pressure of transmutation of moral atrocity culture into maladaptive, driven by conformity changes of the easily pliable social brain. This historical perspective on provincial mindset of castle towns, where Bach was bound to dwell, being subordinate to the hostile and primitive minds, brings the spotlight of comparison to the paradoxically remaining unsolved and now ever-urgent problems of the same cruel absurdity of dysfunctional incivility in the power chairs. It came at the unbearable price to humanity of the widespread maladaptive cognitive disability to prioritize prevention of the fast-approaching collapse of the society by sharply rising environmental illnesses caused by anthropogenic toxicity, despite the shocking data from many global studies. and its urgency has been illuminated through the staggering trend of collective maladaptive pattern of zombification linked with cognitive failure, while involving unique design of music by genius Bach. The addendums of this unconventional publications contain interdisciplinary curricular integration content and map further development of research on the global impacts of the deeper understanding of the observed perceptual phenomenon of transmutation of the culture of moral atrocity into conformity-driven collective cognitive failure, applicable for all realms of decaying society. The featured example of practical multidisciplinary impacts of reflected through music embodiment and brain optimization beyond self-defeat includes such urgent subject as addressing psychological drivers of the widespread disability to prioritize over anything else the task of prevention of rapidly approaching global threats of cumulative effects of anthropogenic toxicity, in the face of shocking collective blind spot of failed declaration of rapidly increasing pandemic of environmental illnesses, consequent of maladaptive deactivated pain alarms to toxicity that had been allowed to become the fabric of our life. That is the reason for the author's call to revise priorities and to demonstrate proactive attitude of no business as usual in the Rosalina Gutmann's PowerPoint video presentation with the brief overview of the involved concepts created for sharing mapped ideas for the urgent research in music education area and beyond, created by her for the Research Commission of International Society for Music Education, that is available on this YouTube channel and on the book-related website. It honors Bach's initialization of the subject in the term Bach sensory deactivation effect, propelled by deeper understanding of psychological drivers of self-defeat, made clear that not money nor social influence are able to spare people from suffering from normalized anthropogenic toxicity in our interconnected universe based on vibrational essence. And the awareness of exposed in this precious ebook inner mechanisms of self-defeat allows for preventing such global threats to humanity as cancer that could have helped Princess Kate to avoid cancer and to guard her children from this environmental illness, among millions of saved human lives of other parents and their children. These and other unexpected, yet evident practical applications of the observed perception phenomenon and multidisciplinary impacts are brought to the attention of interested readers in the addendums. They are shared for collaborative mapping of the next stages of developing research studies on the subjects initiated by Bach and for interdisciplinary curriculum integration. The Unearthed from Oblivion, Bach's concepts for experiential learning enable manifestation into reality of the proclaimed high ethics and morals in the millennia-old religious texts from all traditions and cultures, thanks to music embodiment of otherwise elusive barriers to greatness, helping the world to become a happier place for all. And now, in celebration of collegiate camaraderie, the instant download of PDF file of this ebook is available at 25% discount during limited time of book launch. See details in introduction for YouTube channel. Please, remember to share feedback and testimonials to show camaraderie with the cause initiated by Bach and add the name of own publication or project to feature it among the global family of Bach's fans. Also, you can join Ambassadors for International Campaign Liberate Bach via dedicated tab on the related to this book site for paradoxofinvisibledissonance.com, and also learn about special benefits for sharing this global cause with the worldwide community of musicians. Share this link to information all musicians deserve to know about initiated by Bach and important for all musicians cause, led by the timeless heart-centered intellectual leadership of this master music instructor with neuroscientists' approach to innovation in composing teaching scaffolding.